Welcome to the COBOL-IT Learning Center. Getting started using CitSQL for MySQL in the Developer Studio on Windows. In this module, we will show how to configure and use the Developer Studio with CitSQL for MySQL. CitSQL for MySQL is a member of the CitSQL family of pre-compilers, providing connectivity to the Oracle MySQL database on Windows, Linux and Unix platforms. In these exercises, the CitSQL sample programs are pre-compiled, compiled and run in debug in the Developer Studio on Windows. After these exercises, you will understand how to use the CitSQL for MySQL pre-compiler in the Developer Studio on Windows. Let's get started. Prerequisites. The COBOL-IT compiler suite, Developer Studio, and CitSQL for MySQL must be installed on your Windows machine. You are required to have a C compiler installed. In these exercises, we are connecting to an Oracle MySQL version 5.6 database. The sample programs used in these exercises are included with your CitSQL distribution. For guidance, see the COBOL-IT e-learning modules. Installing COBOL-IT Compiler Suite Enterprise Edition on Windows. Installing COBOL-IT Developer Studio on Windows. Installing the CitSQL family of pre-compilers, and getting started with the COBOL-IT Developer Studio. Now, let's review some key concepts. Key concepts. Integrating a pre-compiler with COBOL-IT using the -preprocess compiler flag. First, the COBOL-IT compiler, COBOL-C, prepares the COBOL source file, expanding copy files. This intermediate file is then passed to the preprocessor as an input file. The CitSQL preprocessor is run from the preprocessor command file. In our example, the preprocessor command file is called precomp.bat. The preprocessor parses the input file, makes transformations, and writes an output file, which is passed back to the COBOL-IT compiler. Finally, the COBOL-IT compiler compiles this source file. Let's proceed now to more specifics. It's important to understand the key components in your CitSQL for MySQL distribution. Let's start with the bin directory. There are just a few components here in the bin directory, but they are important. CitMySQL is the pre-compiler. rcqmysql.dll is the runtime component. libmysql.dll is the client component of the MySQL database engine. Now, let's take a look at the include directory. The include directory contains the SQL.ca file. This file is required when performing a pre-compile. We will see later how our preprocessor command file uses an include search path to locate this file here in the include directory. Now, let's verify that our database server has been prepared for this exercise. Our exercise requires that we be able to log in to the database server on localhost as test user, with the password test, and that a database called DBU exists. We have prepared a script so that we can check on that before we begin. This is the testdb.bat script. We will verify that our database server has been prepared for these exercises by running this script from the command line. Running testdb.bat. As you can see, testdb.bat logs into the database server on the local host using port 3306 as a user called test user, with password test, and executes the show databases command. The connection to the database server is successful, and we can see that the DBU database exists. If the user did not exist, or the password did not exist, or the database did not exist, this would have been evident, and you would have to correct the situation before proceeding with these exercises. Guidelines for preparing your database server for these exercises are included in the online training module installing the CitSQL family of pre-compilers. Now that we have verified that our database server is prepared, let's begin our exercises in the Developer Studio. This is the Developer Studio. We have created a project and imported the CitSQL sample programs. We have also included precomp.bat, which is the batch file we will use to invoke the preprocessor, and testdb.bat, which is the command we used to verify our database server was prepared. Let's do a quick review of our window preferences settings now. On the Preferences screen, we expanded the General option, and then expanded the Editors option. Then, we selected Text Editors. On the Text Editors screen, we selected Show Line Numbers. This is very useful, particularly when debugging. Next, we selected the Workspace option. On the Workspace screen, we deselected Build Automatically, and selected the Refresh and Save Automatically functions. Next, we selected the Run Debug option. We expanded the Run Debug option, and selected Perspectives. For the option titled Open the associated perspective when launching, we've selected Always. This will cause the debugger perspective to open when a debug operation is performed. This completes the Workspace configuration. To save settings, click on the Apply button. Then, click OK to return to the Developer Studio. Let's take a quick look at our sample programs. This is the CitSQL sample program. The CitSQL sample programs are CIT-test.cob and dbconnect.cob. CIT-test calls dbconnect. Let's take a quick look at dbconnect now, which is where we have set up our code to log onto the database server. This is dbconnect. Here you can see how our connect is configured. We have set this program up to connect to the DBU database as test user, with password test on localhost. Let's take a look at our project properties now. Project Properties. Right-click on the project name in the Navigator window, and select Properties from the drop-down window. This will open the Properties screen. On the Properties windows, select COBOL Properties. On the COBOL Properties window, select Enable Source Settings to see the interface for setting project properties and compiler flags. There are 3 settings on the Project tab that we will be reviewing. Please notice, COBOL program extension to compile is now set to CBL. The COB extension you see here by default has been removed. COBOL program extension to preprocess before compile is set to COB. As a result, all source files in our project that have a .cob extension will apply the -preprocess compiler flag and run the preprocessor command file. Next, the preprocessor command is set to precomp.bat. Precomp.bat is the preprocessor command file, which is designed to run our CitSQL precompiler and preprocess the source file with the .cob extension. Let's take a look at the preprocessor command file now. When you select a preprocessor command file, the Developer Studio associates it with the -preprocess compiler flag. Precomp.bat is our preprocessor command file. This script calls the CitSQL precompiler to preprocess the input file, and produce an output file. The Include Search Path option gives the location of the SQLCA file. The Target Pattern option is set to %2. That associates the output file with the output file created by the precompiler. This output file will be compiled by the COBOL-IT compiler. The command ends with %1. This is the input file that the precompiler will use. Now, let's look at our compiler flags. On the Link tab, we have set the -o compiler flag to place output files into the object directory. On the Debug Optimize tab, we have selected the -g compiler flag. This is required by the debugger. On the Warnings tab, we have selected the -w compiler flag. This eliminates non-critical compiler warnings. Now, let's build the project. Click on Project on the main menu, and select Clean from the drop-down menu. On the Clean window, keep the defaults. Click OK to build the project. After the build completes, let's take a look at the compiler console, and see what happened. To see what happens in the build, we can expand the compiler console view. First, the compiler, COBOL-IT, takes the sample source program, and builds a command line with the -preprocess compiler flag. Then, the preprocessor command file is run. Finally, the compiler creates the compiled object file in the object subfolder. Now, we will set our run configuration. In the run configuration, we will set the environment variables required by COBOL-IT and Oracle MySQL for the runtime environment. To create a run configuration, select the sample program in the Navigator window by clicking on it. Then, right-click on the sample program to see a drop-down menu. Select Run as from the drop-down menu, and Run Configuration from the subsequent drop-down menu. This will open the Run Configuration wizard. On the Run Configuration screen, select COBOL program in the panel on the left. Then, click on the New Launch Configuration toolbar button. This will create a new run configuration. On the Main tab, name the configuration CITtest.cob. The project and program values are pre-filled. Now let's look at the Runtime tab. On the Runtime tab, you should not have to make any changes. The Runtime tab sets the name of your runtime and debugger, as well as scripts that should be run before the run or debug command is launched. Let's proceed to the Environment tab. On the Environment tab, we set the environment variables required by COBOL-IT and Oracle MySQL. Set COB error file to COBOL.txt. If there are any error messages, they will print to this file. Set COBOL library path to include your object folder, and to include the location of the CitSQL runtime component, and Oracle MySQL client library. Click Apply to accept your changes. Click Close to return to the Developer Studio. To run the sample program, click on the Run button on the toolbar. This is the final output display for our sample program. Now, let's return to the Developer Studio and run the sample program in Debug. To run the program in Debug, click on the Debug button on the toolbar. This will open the program in the Debug Perspective. This is CITtest running in the COBOL-IT debugger. Now, we will set a breakpoint on line 114, so that we can step through an EXEC statement that returns data to our program. Let's run to our breakpoint now. We have run to our breakpoint, so that we can perform an EXEC fetch statement. This statement will return data into our working storage section. Let's perform a single step here. We have performed the step, and you can see the data has been returned into the variable view. Now, let's set a breakpoint on line 41 and run to the end of the program. We can then check our final output display. This is the final output display for our sample program. Let's return to the debugger now. We have run to our final breakpoint. Here, we will terminate our debug session by clicking on the Terminate button on the debug toolbar. Now, let's proceed to our summary. Summary. In this module, we configured our workspace and our project for use with CitSQL for MySQL in the Developer Studio on Windows. We illustrated the use of the -preprocess compiler flag. Using the sample programs, we performed compile, run, and run in debug exercises. You are now prepared to use the CitSQL for MySQL precompiler in the Developer Studio on Windows. For more detailed information, and the very latest reference documentation, please visit the doc folder under your COBOL-IT and CitSQL home directories. We encourage you to continue using the COBOL-IT online training program. Thank you.